When Conor McGregor needed help that money alone couldn't buy, he made a deal with the Russian Mafia that would haunt him for years and put his entire family at risk. Picture this, it's a freezing February night in 2018, and Conor McGregor walks into an exclusive Moscow nightclub that doesn't appear on any tourist map or business directory. The entrance is unmarked, the security is former Spetsnaz special forces, and the clientele includes some of the most dangerous men in Eastern Europe. Conor isn't here to party or celebrate. He's here because he has a problem that his money, his fame, and his connections can't solve through normal channels. What happens over the next 3 hours in a private VIP room will change the trajectory of Conor's life forever and create obligations that he's still trying to fulfill years later. The deal he makes with the men in that room will explain mysterious business decisions, strange travel patterns, and relationships that have puzzled fans and investigators for years. The story of how Conor McGregor became entangled with Russian organized crime is one of desperation, miscalculation, and the dangerous reality that even the most successful people sometimes need help from the darkest corners of the world. Former FBI agent Robert Chen, who spent 15 years investigating Russian organized crime networks, explains that Conor's situation isn't unique among high-profile celebrities and athletes. When wealthy individuals face problems that can't be solved through legal channels, they often turn to organizations that operate outside the law, Chen reveals. Russian organized crime groups are particularly attractive because they have global reach, sophisticated operations, and the ability to solve problems quickly and permanently. But they always collect payment, and the price is usually much higher than people realize when they first make contact. But before we reveal the shocking details of Conor's Moscow deal, you need to understand the crisis that drove him to seek help from people he would normally never associate with. The problem began in late 2017, when Conor's business expansion into Eastern European markets encountered resistance that went far beyond typical business competition. His whiskey distribution networks were being blocked by local competitors who had connections to organized crime groups that controlled alcohol distribution in several key markets. Normal business solutions weren't working. Legal channels were slow and ineffective in countries where corruption was endemic and powerful criminal organizations influenced everything from customs regulations to retail distribution. Conor's legitimate business partners were being threatened, his shipments were being mysteriously delayed or damaged, and his local representatives were receiving warnings that made it clear they were dealing with forces that didn't respect Western business practices. The situation was costing Conor millions in lost revenue and threatening to derail his entire Eastern European expansion strategy. But more concerning were the escalating threats that suggested the opposition was willing to use violence to prevent his business operations from succeeding. His security team and business advisors told him that fighting these forces through conventional means would take years and might never be successful. The organizations blocking his business operations had deep roots in the region and connections that made them essentially untouchable through normal legal or business channels. That's when someone in Conor's network suggested an alternative approach, making contact with Russian organized crime figures who could clear the obstacles and ensure his business operations proceeded without interference. The suggestion was dangerous and potentially illegal, but Conor was desperate to protect his business investments and frustrated by his inability to make progress through legitimate channels. The initial contact was made through intermediaries, business contacts in Moscow who had connections to what they euphemistically called influential people, who could help with Conor's problem. Several preliminary meetings established trust and demonstrated that these contacts could indeed deliver on their promises to remove the obstacles facing his business operations. But the Russian organized crime figures made it clear that their help would come at a price that went beyond simple financial payment. They wanted something more valuable: association with Conor's global brand, access to his business networks, and most importantly, future favors that they could call in when needed. The meeting in the Moscow nightclub in February 2018 was where the actual deal was negotiated. Conor sat across from three men whose names he was told but immediately understood he should never repeat. These weren't street criminals or local thugs, they were sophisticated operators who controlled business empires worth billions and had connections that reached the highest levels of Russian government and international criminal networks. The proposition they presented was straightforward but dangerous. They would ensure that Conor's Eastern European business operations proceeded without further interference. His competitors would back down, his distribution networks would be protected, and his business would flourish in markets that had previously been closed to him. In exchange, Conor would make several commitments that seemed reasonable at the time but would create complications he couldn't have anticipated. And here's where the deal takes a shocking turn that reveals just how deeply Conor became entangled with dangerous forces. The first part of the agreement was financial but structured in ways that concealed the true nature of the payments. Conor would invest in several Russian business ventures that appeared legitimate on the surface but were actually money laundering operations for organized crime proceeds. The investments were structured through shell companies and international financial networks that made them virtually impossible to trace back to their criminal origins. The second commitment was more concerning. Conor agreed to use his social media influence and public platform to promote certain business ventures, individuals, and causes that served the interests of the Russian organized crime network. These promotions would be subtle, mentions in interviews, appearances at events, social media posts that seemed organic but were actually coordinated to serve specific strategic purposes. But the most dangerous part of the deal was what they called future considerations, unspecified favors that the Russian organized crime figures could request at any time. Conor was assured these would be reasonable requests that wouldn't compromise his safety or reputation, but the vague language of the agreement gave them enormous leverage over his future decisions. The future considerations clause is how Russian organized crime groups maintain control over people they've helped, explains former FBI agent Chen. It's intentionally vague because it allows them to demand almost anything at any time, and the person who accepted their help has no legal recourse to refuse. At the time, Conor convinced himself that he was just making pragmatic business decisions in a difficult market. He didn't see himself as partnering with criminals but rather as working with powerful local contacts who understood how business really operated in their region. But the reality of what he had agreed to would become clear much sooner than he expected. Within weeks of the Moscow meeting, the obstacles to Conor's Eastern European business operations disappeared almost magically. Competitors who had been aggressively blocking his distribution suddenly backed down. Regulatory problems that had seemed insurmountable were resolved overnight. His whiskey began appearing in premium locations across markets that had previously been closed to him. The success seemed to validate his decision to work with the Russian contacts. His business profits from Eastern European operations increased dramatically, and the initial financial investments he had made in the Russian ventures started generating impressive returns. But then the requests for future considerations began arriving, and Conor realized the true cost of the help he had accepted. The first request seemed innocent enough: attend a charity event in Moscow and be photographed with certain individuals who wanted to be associated with his celebrity status. Conor complied, not fully understanding that the individuals were using the photos to enhance their own reputations and create the impression of legitimate international business connections. But the requests quickly escalated to more concerning demands. But here's what makes this situation absolutely terrifying, because what the Russian Mafia asked Conor to do next crossed lines that he never imagined he would be forced to cross. 6 months after the initial Moscow meeting, Conor received a request that made it clear he was no longer dealing with simple business arrangements. He was asked to facilitate an introduction between one of his international business contacts and representatives of the Russian organized crime network. The request was framed as a legitimate business networking opportunity, but Conor understood that he was being asked to help the Russian criminals expand their operations into new territories and markets by providing access to his international business relationships. Refusing the request wasn't a simple option. His Russian contacts made it clear that declining to help would have consequences, not just for his Eastern European business operations, but potentially for his safety and the safety of his family. The veiled threats were never explicit enough to be legally actionable, but they were clear enough to be genuinely frightening. Conor found himself in an impossible situation. Complying with the request would make him complicit in expanding criminal operations and potentially expose him to legal liability if law enforcement ever discovered his role. But refusing could trigger retaliation from people who had proven they were willing to use violence to achieve their objectives. Intelligence sources suggest that Conor did facilitate at least some of the requested introductions, though he tried to limit his involvement and maintain plausible deniability about the true nature of the business relationships he was helping to create. Once you accept help from Russian organized crime, you're essentially trapped, explains Chen. They own you in ways that are very difficult to escape. Every favor they do for you creates more leverage, and every request you comply with gives them more control over your life and business operations. The situation continued to deteriorate as the Russian contacts made increasingly aggressive demands. Before we continue with this shocking story of criminal entanglement and dangerous obligations, make sure you're subscribed to Notorious Stories and hit that like button. We dive deep into the most shocking and untold stories of Conor McGregor's life, from his biggest victories to his most challenging moments. Drop a comment below and let us know, what other Conor McGregor secrets would you like us to investigate? The truth about the Notorious One is always more fascinating than what you see in the headlines. By 2019, Conor's relationship with the Russian organized crime network had evolved from occasional business favors to what intelligence analysts describe as a systematic pattern of cooperation that suggested he had become a valuable asset in their international operations. Travel records show Conor making frequent trips to Moscow and other Russian cities that weren't publicized and didn't correspond to any obvious business or promotional activities. These trips typically lasted 24 to 48 hours and involved meetings with individuals who had no apparent connection to his legitimate business interests. Financial analysis reveals that Conor's Russian business investments had grown substantially, creating a financial entanglement that made it even more difficult for him to distance himself from the criminal network. He was now genuinely dependent on the profits from these ventures, which were generating tens of millions of dollars annually. But perhaps most concerning were indications that Conor was being used as a conduit for laundering money through his legitimate business operations. His whiskey company, real estate investments, and other business ventures provided perfect vehicles for integrating criminal proceeds into the legitimate financial system. High-profile celebrities and athletes are extremely valuable to organized crime groups for money laundering purposes, Chen explains. Their businesses generate legitimate revenue streams that can be used to disguise criminal proceeds, and their fame provides cover that makes it difficult for law enforcement to investigate without appearing to target successful individuals. Intelligence agencies in multiple countries had begun monitoring Conor's Russian connections by late 2019, though they hadn't yet gathered enough evidence to justify formal investigations or charges. The situation reached a crisis point in early 2020 when international law enforcement agencies began a major crackdown on Russian organized crime networks operating in Western countries. Several of the individuals Conor had been dealing with were arrested or became subjects of international investigations. Suddenly, Conor faced the very real possibility that his cooperation with these criminal networks might become public knowledge or result in legal charges. His attorneys scrambled to evaluate his exposure and develop strategies for extricating him from the dangerous relationships he had developed. The solution they recommended was risky but necessary. Conor needed to cooperate with law enforcement agencies while simultaneously trying to maintain enough of his Russian relationships to prevent retaliation. What followed was a delicate balancing act that has defined Conor's life for the past several years. He began providing limited information to intelligence agencies about his Russian contacts while trying to distance himself from the most obviously criminal aspects of his business relationships. At the same time, he maintained just enough contact with the Russian organized crime network to avoid triggering the kind of violent retaliation that could threaten his family's safety. It was a dangerous middle ground that required constant management and created enormous stress. His Russian contacts understood what was happening and made it clear that complete cooperation with law enforcement would have severe consequences. But they also seemed to calculate that Conor was more valuable to them as a conflicted asset than as an enemy who might fully cooperate with authorities. The result is a situation that continues to this day. Today, Conor remains entangled with Russian organized crime networks in ways that limit his freedom and influence his business and personal decisions. While he's no longer actively facilitating criminal operations, he maintains financial relationships and social connections that create ongoing vulnerability. Intelligence analysts believe that Conor has provided enough cooperation to law enforcement to protect himself from criminal prosecution, but not enough to completely break free from the Russian criminal networks that still have leverage over him through their knowledge of his past cooperation and ongoing financial entanglements. His frequent unexplained trips to Russia continue, though less frequently than during the peak of his cooperation with criminal networks. His Russian business investments remain substantial, though he's been slowly trying to divest from the most obviously problematic ventures. The "future considerations" clause from his original 2018 agreement continues to haunt him. While the demands have become less frequent and less egregious, they haven't stopped completely. Conor still receives occasional requests for small favors, social media posts, business introductions, or appearances at events that serve the interests of his Russian contacts. The reality is that Conor will probably never be completely free from these relationships, observes Chen. Russian organized crime groups don't release people who have been useful to them. They maintain control through a combination of financial entanglement, compromising information, and implied threats. Conor has probably accepted that this is a permanent part of his life. The impact on Conor's family has been significant. His wife Dee reportedly was unaware of the full extent of his Russian entanglements until law enforcement officials briefed her during the 2020 investigations. The revelation created serious tension in their relationship and forced the family to implement enhanced security measures to protect against potential retaliation. His children are growing up with security protocols that go far beyond normal celebrity protection, specifically designed to prevent kidnapping or other actions that Russian criminal networks might use to maintain leverage over Conor. The psychological toll has been equally significant. Friends report that Conor has become more paranoid and less trusting since becoming entangled with Russian organized crime. He's constantly aware that his communications might be monitored, his decisions might be influenced by hidden pressures, and his family's safety depends on maintaining a delicate balance with dangerous forces. The Moscow nightclub meeting in February 2018 was supposed to solve Conor's business problems. Instead, it created a nightmare that has haunted him for years and will likely continue to influence his life for decades to come. The deal that seemed pragmatic at the time turned out to be a trap that he may never fully escape. Conor McGregor's experience with Russian organized crime serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking solutions outside legal channels, no matter how powerful or wealthy you are. The help that money alone couldn't buy came at a price far higher than he could have imagined, a price he's still paying years later. The Russian Mafia deal that was supposed to protect his business empire instead put everything he's built at risk and created vulnerabilities that his enemies could exploit. It proves that some problems are better left unsolved than addressed through cooperation with criminal networks that never release their grip on those who accept their help. If you enjoyed this incredible story of criminal entanglement and dangerous deals, make sure you're subscribed to Notorious Stories and hit that like button. We dive deep into the most shocking and untold stories of Conor McGregor's life, from his biggest victories to his most challenging moments. Drop a comment below and let us know, what other Conor McGregor secrets would you like us to investigate? The truth about the Notorious One is always more fascinating than what you see in the headlines.